Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to tackle one of the most persistent, pull-your-hair-out challenges in education. We're talking about how to transform classroom feedback from a frustrating one-way street into a really dynamic, active learning engine. I mean, if you've ever felt like your students just glance at the grade on an assignment and completely ignore those comments you painstakingly wrote out for them, yeah, you're definitely in the right place. Today we're exploring how working with your students to co-construct success criteria can literally change the entire way they engage with learning and assessment. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the passive feedback problem, define true success criteria, walk through a practical 6-stage co-construction cycle, troubleshoot some common pitfalls, and finally, look at how to build an engine for self-regulation. Let's get started. Section 1. The passive feedback problem, and why feedback is ignored. We really have to ask ourselves, why does our feedback so often just go ignored? We spend hours on it, right? But the research tells us that traditional, transmissive feedback, where you, the teacher, just hand down a verdict, well, it frequently falls flat. And honestly, it's not because your students don't care. It's because they lack what researchers call proactive recipients. Think of it this way. Regulating your own learning requires interpretation, effort, purpose, and agency. If students are just sitting there passively receiving a grade, they aren't equipped to actually use that information. They need a role that goes way, way beyond just receiving scores. And when we change that role, we change everything. This quote absolutely hits the nail on the head. When we involve students in the process, assessment becomes a learning event rather than a judgment event. By inviting your students to compare their own work to quality criteria and generate their own self-feedback or peer feedback, we totally shift their mindset. They move out of that passive compliance mode and step directly into active self-regulation. There's this fascinating recent Australian study that measured what happens when teachers actually implement this kind of student-centered feedback. The data was crystal clear. When teachers combined models, success criteria, and visual improvement walls, students actually reported the feedback as significantly more helpful. They specifically said that seeing what quality looks like allowed them to self-assess properly. And what's really cool? Engaging in peer assessment benefited not just the student getting the feedback, but also the student providing it. It forces them to critically apply the criteria themselves, which is just a massive win for everyone. Section 2. Defining true success criteria. What they are and what they aren't. Before we can build these things with our students, we need to be clear on what they actually are. So here's our working definition. Success criteria are explicit descriptions of student performances. It's exactly what students will say, do, make, or write that provides observable evidence that a learning goal has been met. These criteria basically help students answer 3 huge questions. What am I trying to learn? What does successful work actually look or sound like? And how can I use that understanding to improve my own work? And this comparison right here brilliantly illustrates the difference. A task instruction just tells a student what to do, like write 3 paragraphs. But a success criterion, that tells a student what quality looks like. Each paragraph develops a distinct reason supporting the central claim. A really useful mental test for you here is to ask, could a student follow all my instructions perfectly and still produce poor work? If the answer is yes, then you've just given them a list of procedures, not actual indicators of quality. Okay, let's untangle 3 terms that get constantly mixed up in education: success criteria, assessment criteria, and rubrics. Assessment criteria define the formal aspects of what will be judged. A rubric organizes those criteria across different levels of performance, and that's usually used by the teacher during grading. But success criteria, they are totally unique. They're designed to be learner-usable, often written in I statements, and they are used before, during, and after the learning. Put simply, rubrics organize criteria, but success criteria make quality visible to the learner while the learning is actually taking place. Now, what's really interesting about this CREST template from UCLA is how it forces a very specific translation. When a teacher starts with a learning goal, they might use abstract verbs like understand, develop, or become fluent. But when mapping that over to success criteria, the verbs have to shift to concrete, observable actions, like explain, describe, or model. It's an amazing mental check to make sure you're moving from an abstract standard in your head to concrete, observable evidence for your students. Section 3. The 6-stage co-construction cycle. Building criteria. All right, we've reached the climax of our explainer. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. Co-constructing criteria does not mean letting students negotiate away academic rigor. No way. The formula is teacher-secured standards plus student-generated meaning plus repeated use during the task. You, the teacher, completely retain responsibility for the rigorous standard. You're just guiding the students to generate the meaning so they actually internalize it.
So let's rapidly walk through how this builds across 6 stages. Step 1, you prep by securing the non-negotiables based on your curriculum. Step 2, you provide the class with contrasting evidence, maybe one amazing anonymous sample and one near miss. Step 3, students work to identify the differences between those samples. Step 4, based on those differences, the students propose criteria for success. Step 5, you guide them to align their ideas with the formal standards, kind of consolidating them into a tight, usable list. And finally, Step 6, students actively use, test, and revise those criteria on their own work. It's a real game changer.
Section 4. Pitfalls and fixes. Troubleshooting the cycle. Because, let's be real, classrooms are dynamic, messy places, and things don't always go perfectly on the first try.
Age and developmental levels definitely matter here. In primary classrooms, younger students absolutely can co-construct criteria, but it has to be concrete. We're talking physical sorting of models, visual picture cues, and brief check-ins like one-star, one-step feedback. For high school classrooms, the danger is totally different. Older students will often look at a single exemplar and treat it like a rigid template to mindlessly copy. You fix that by showing multiple exemplars that achieve quality in vastly different ways. This forces them to understand the underlying principles rather than just copying surface features.
Let's rapid fire through 3 more common pitfalls. Problem: students only generate obvious, surface-level features, like write neatly. The fix: show them a non-model that is beautifully neat but totally fails the actual learning intention. Problem: students apply the criteria mechanically, just checking boxes. The fix: make them justify their self-assessment by pointing to specific, concrete evidence in their work. And problem: you get pushback that co-construction lowers expectations. The fix: confidently explain that the teacher always retains responsibility for the standard. Student voice simply makes that standard intelligible.
Section 5. The engine for self-regulation. The cultural shift. Let's bring this all together.
The crucial point here is that the goal of co-construction is not simply to end up with a neat little list of rules written on the whiteboard. The true goal is building proactive recipients. You're actively shifting students from being passive receivers of a final grade into active agents. You're building their capacity to monitor their own strategy, evaluate their own actions, and course-correct independently while the learning is actually still happening. This quote perfectly captures the horizon we are aiming for here. When students are active participants in assessment, assessment becomes more than a classroom requirement, it becomes an engine for SRL, self-regulated learning. By opening up that black box of what makes good work good and inviting your students in to define it alongside you, you are literally handing them the keys to their own academic growth. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on as you plan your next unit. Is your feedback an end-of-the-road judgment event, or is it the beginning of a student-owned learning event? I highly encourage you to try out the 6-stage co-construction cycle with a lesson this week and just watch what happens when your students finally see exactly what success looks like. Thank you so much for engaging with this explainer, and happy teaching.